welcome to our panel, and the title I hope you like, and I hope that drew you in as well as the wonderful panellists, which is Astro-Linguistic Emoticon Whisperers, Phrenologists, Leech Collectors Need Not Apply. How will localization jobs be transformed by AI in the years to avoid inexistence? I'll be your moderator today. I'm CEO of Line People Global, and we have a wonderful panel here to discuss this with you today. We have Georg, who's CEO from Phrase, Barnaby, Chief Commercial Officer from a small company called TransPerfect, and we have Jonas Ryborg, who's VP of Global Delivery Practice at Scientific. So, there we go. Okay, brilliant. So before we start, I wanted to have a show of hands, throw it out to you guys and see if any of you can understand what this description of this job might be. Summertime contract, must have attractive legs, doesn't get queasy in asset. Anybody? What job might that describe? Baywatch. Anybody else? Have a go? No? No? Okay. This is the leech collecting. So leech collecting was actually a sizable industry in the mid-19th century with a strong export-import business in Europe and the US. The leeches themselves were used for bloodletting by doctors. For collection, they used their own legs, gathering the leeches after they'd had finished sucking enough blood. As you can imagine, by the end of the 19th century, this job had all but disappeared. Okay, now we don't for a second liken jobs in our business for leech collecting, however. But many of the people in our industry fear that some roles will go the way of the leech collector. And our panel today, we hope to give a clearer picture as we explore not just the impact of AI on our current roles, but also look ahead at the skills, at the adaptability, and of course the ethical considerations that will define the relevance in the future. So we're hoping to illuminate a path, and actually I thought it was very interesting today to hear that our keynote speaker was talking about looking internally to upskill and that we need to understand what skills we have first. So we're looking to illuminate a path to navigate transformation and offer insights into new roles that are emerging on the horizon of discussing how we might all avoid becoming the proverbial phrenologists or leech collectors of the future. So I'm going to move to the panel and talk about the current role of AI in language services and tech. But before I do that, I thought we'd just show a little bit of current data, and this comes from LinkedIn Talent Insights. And what we're looking at here is just a picture of what the localization and translation industry looks like today in terms of the number of professionals. Now remember, it's limited by the fact that we have to choose, if we're on our LinkedIn profile, we've got to choose localization and translation as our industry, which of course a lot of client companies won't do. But those that choose localization and translation as their industry, and then we pick all of the industries globally and just look at how many professionals we have in this industry, you'll see that the number is quite large. If we look at what are the fastest growing of those titles, no surprises here. We've senior project manager, team lead, software engineer, language specialist, linguist, interpreter, medical interpreter, and business development manager. If we then look at LinkedIn, and now here we have to put in, and thanks to ChatGPT for doing this for me, but I put in a Boolean search into, this is if somebody had AI somewhere on their profile. And also they're in the localization and translation industry, you'll see that that number of professionals drops quite considerably. And of course, we see that the top companies that are employing these people are RWS, TransPerfect, We Localize, Linebridge, and Translated. And if we look at the fastest growing titles here, you'll see that it changes quite a bit. So here we have titles like Quality Rater, Data Annotator, Grader, Data Analyst, Data Specialist. Director of Business Development has moved up because we're all trying to sell AI, of course. Evaluator, Training Specialist, and Tester. So to my panelists, what do you think of those roles? Do you think it's reflective? Yes?
Yeah, I think Anybody? So. I think definitely the annotator piece and so on, that part has grown a lot for us at Scientific, and I'm sure at TransPerfect as well. So it's all about change, right? And I think that's probably the biggest challenge as well when you think about how the industry will change, is the fear of change and embracing that change. If I think back to when I started as a translator back in the day, I was thinking of, should I invest in a CAT tool or not? And in the end, I did, and I'm glad I did, because it would be very restrictive not to invest at that time. And then a few years down the line, it was, running a business, it was, should we lean into MT and post-editing? And we did, otherwise we would have been restricted again. So it's all about productivity tools, and now it's AI. It's another productivity tool. You can do more with AI. So definitely, I think being afraid of that change is definitely the biggest challenge to me in this circumstances.
Great. I mean, you've navigated some of those changes already, having been in the language services, language tech for quite some time. And how do you see AI integrating into language services full stop? Like, what are the immediate impacts, do you think?
I think that there's a bunch. I mean, I don't even know where to start. I mean, you can look at, from a translator perspective, there are ways to use AI as a tool, as a co-pilot, if you like. Different ways of using it as a translator in terms of getting input on the translations, terminology, and so on. And then as a PM, you can use it to get the right data and make decisions and so on. So there's a long list of different ways that all our lives will change with AI.
Yeah. Barnaby, in terms of TransPerfect, of course, you know, I mentioned jokingly that it was a small company in the industry, but looking at process and project management and process optimization, what about your work in machine learning and data analysis? How has that changed in terms of process improvement?
I think there's been different impacts, and there's different levels. The first level is how AI created a number of new jobs. And you mentioned the graders, annotators, data scientists, developers who are working on the algorithm. And so you always have to feed the machine by humans working on it, create the machine, and then test the results. So there's really been a new business line, which, you know, one of my points is always that the language industry has always been embracing new technology, always been embracing AI. If you look at AI and the companies working on data, it comes from spell checks, right? And that's where it all started. The spell check is your first productivity tool. So it was a natural progression for us to go into data annotation, improving, refining the engines, and also validating those engines. So I think that is a whole new job that was created for TransPerfect. Over the past 3 years, we hired over 2,000 people in new positions that did not exist before this. We were not the first ones in the game, but and we're not the biggest in the game, but I think that kind of shows how much jobs that created. If you look around the room today, a lot of companies are not doing services, they're doing AI, they're doing technology. There's still the services behind, but it's definitely been a big change. And then there's also what impacts the project managers, what impacts the translators. And today, yes, if you're not embracing the tools, it's not going to work. But also, people have been embracing these tools always. People have bought into translation memory. They bought into different tools to do the QC. Before you had to do a RAWs file. Now you just do it with natural language. So it just got easier. But I also think that we're in a natural progression, and I think in the language industry, it's something that's always been part of our culture, part of our DNA. So it's a natural progression.
Yes.
I might sort of join in the conversation at this point, because I think there's also, if we take a step back, I think there's a mindset shift that's already been referenced, but there's a business model shift, there's a generational shift, there's an inflection point in technologies that's happening here. And I think that's actually one of the most important existential things for people to grasp. We talk a lot about this in our company, that these tools can allow people not to become 20% better or more effective than they were previously, but 10 times better. And that's quite a difficult thing for a human to understand, because usually when we pat ourselves on the back, when we get 20% more effective, and even if we get 2 times more effective than we previously were, we think that's really incredible progress. But actually, if you have everyone at the same starting line, and some people are 2 times more productive and some are 10 times more productive, that's a 5x differential. And so that's the massive leveraged opportunity here for productivity and effectiveness in a whole range of roles, from software engineering to marketing to sales, and so on. And the implication, I think, to business model transformation is quite profound. We see companies in 3 buckets, broadly speaking. Those that are absolutely the cutting edge and the ones who embrace and, in fact, stretch the boundaries of what's currently possible and push towards, very, very high levels of automation. And then there's a big wide middle that want to do the same as previously, but for less. And then there's a group that are sitting on the sidelines waiting to see which LLM wins, which I think is not a great strategy. But this reality, I think, is borne out in some of the sort of challenges of 2023 and maybe even 24 that are seen in services industries that haven't adapted to that new world as quickly. And so the provocative statement I would make is that there is an immediate challenge, and the hope I would say is that generative AI is going to drive massive increases of volume. So there'll be a dip and then massive growth. And so there's a question mark for all of us in language technology and services on how to be participants in that growth upswing when it comes. And that's what AI requires us to do, is to not think about progress as linear, but highly inflected.
Great. We were listening to the keynote speaker this morning talk about skills and training and adaptation, as I said. And I was reading a report recently from Pluralsight on AI skills for the future. And 95% of all of the people that were surveyed, which was 1,400 across the US and the UK, said that they believed that the CEOs and management would invest in AI in the future. But a lot of those, 95% of those, said that they felt that without the skills, it wouldn't succeed. So I think the first thing we need to do in any industry, whether it's our industry or whether it's the IT industry, is understand what we have. Maybe we could have a show of hands from people in the audience to see who in their organization believes they understand what AI skills they have in their organization right now. Do we understand? One? Yeah? Anybody in the audience understand? Yeah? Great. And for those of you that understand or don't understand, do you think that you have a plan for training? Like, how are we going to not do anything? How are we going to move forward? And so I think this is something that we need to really consider, because we have to train our people to move forward. So maybe to our panelists, with AI reshaping the landscape, what do you think are the essential skills and training that are now required for professionals in language services so that they can remain relevant?
To me, it's important to understand the foundation of AI. How does it work? How is it trained? How is it fine-tuned and so on? It's a good skill to have, a good understanding to have, but it's really much more important to actually use it. Go and play with it. Understand how, in what practical cases you can use it yourself. And there's a lot of free AI or LLM chatbot tools online today that you can use. And just look at your daily work, the tasks, to Dr. Susskind's point, and see what task can you actually use LLMs for. And I think for me, in my work, there's a lot of different ways of using it. So just go play with it and learn that way instead of taking a course on. You can do that as well, but go to LinkedIn or Amazon or Microsoft or Google and do those courses, but just play around with it and learn that way.
One super practical tip is ask it. So if you go into ChatGPT and you say, please, can you write me a 10-week course on how to improve my use of ChatGPT, it will give you a curriculum. And if you say, please, can you teach me as a non-technical user how to create my own GPTs, it will tell you. And then what can I use it? I am such and such at such and such a company. This is what I do day to day. These are my KPIs. How can I use it in my job? It will tell you. It's absolutely extraordinary how much it will teach you to use it if you ask it. And oftentimes it's just encouraging people to build the habit, which is the big initial value unlock.
Yeah, I think a lot of the training is you have to go out and train yourself. I mean, that is also the opportunity that you can do it yourself, and you have to be curious. Then as a company, I think you have to have a culture which is of hunting down anything that can be automated and making sure that humans do only added value. And so if you look at all the tasks and as part of the culture, these tools are helping you achieve that. And I think that the culture has to be look for any automation, any manual work, and kill that. ChatGPT has made some lot of changes. The generative AI has made a lot of changes, but in a lot of what we've already been doing, these changes have been ongoing, right? And there is a change in paradigm in the volume. And I think that is where we do have to adapt and start thinking of, as a project manager, I'm not going to be managing X amount of volume, X amount of products. I'm going to be managing triple X amount of products. And then you have to start thinking about progression, project management, program management, how do we manage bigger things, how do we add more value? So these are all things that give people opportunity to do more interesting things. So I think that's where the culture of hunting automation, bringing added value, traditional training to being able to manage larger projects, traditional training to customer service remains, and then making sure that you're also adapting to the new technology. But I would say that for people coming into the market, this is also a great opportunity because you can learn the same as somebody who's already in the business is learning at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, just a practical example, and I think it's really good advice, is to say, take the fear out and just use it. When I was building the Boolean string for the data up here, I mean, I remember writing Boolean strings where I had to write them into Notepad. And then word wrap and do all of those different things. But when you do it in ChatGPT, it just lets you cut and paste the code and pop it in. So life for a recruiter is much easier. So definitely try it. Georg, considering the rapid evolution of AI, how can organizations support their employees in transitioning
so
to these demands?
I had the opportunity 3 weeks ago to go to OpenAI's headquarters in San Francisco and spend a day there as part of a group. And Sam Altman was there, and I posed a question to him about software engineering, and I said, if the current generation of tools can make software engineers 20 to 50% more effective, what's the next generation going to deliver? And he said, you should already be getting 2x, not 20 to 50%. So I think he was a little bit in sales mode. But he then predicted that the next edition, ChatGPT 5, will make software engineers 100 times more productive. So I came back with a certain degree of religion about this, and we're giving everyone in the company ChatGPT licenses because I want them to make this mindset shift around the 10x productivity improvement now with the current generation of tools, because the sense I have is that we need to be good at this the moment that GPT-5 lands. The way they gave us to sort of think about it was that think 3.5 is a 5-second task, like drafting an email. 4 is a 5-minute task, like writing a job description. And GPT-5 will be a 5-hour task. And you just have to kind of use your imagination to think what a 5-hour task is. I think that's like asking the CFO to produce a 6-month cash flow statement. That's sophisticated stuff. So we want everyone in the company in all of their roles to use it. I'll give you another example. Like if there's a project that takes 50 hours of elapsed time of like 3 different teams that need to meet twice a week for 5 weeks, if you can use GPT to do all of that in like 2 hours of elapsed time, then it's an afternoon, or 5 hours elapsed time, that's an afternoon, right? So like going from 6 weeks of elapsed time to 1 day of elapsed time, that's the sort of productivity enhancement if people really use it. So first thing is leaders can say those things out loud, like set the bar not incrementally but dramatically higher so that people reframe what success actually looks like, and then provide the tools, of course, and then start to model the behavior. So I have a GPT window up in all of our meetings. We frequently ask it questions. We use it as a thought partner in our executive meetings, and we kind of expect people to do the same in all of their meetings as well. So I think recognizing the reality that this is changing super fast and then helping everyone in your organization see that reality too is probably the single most difficult but important thing to get right now.
And what about interdisciplinary skills, Barnaby? Maybe talk to us about those in light of AI. How have those changed?
Yeah, I mean, back to the point of the high volumes and the added value. I think that's really where you need to work, and it's not anything more complicated. That it needs to be adapted. I really think so it's interesting how the people approach it differently, and I had this problem with our big clients who purchasing tells them that like you need to show us you're using AI because we know you're using it, but my boss asked us to bring in more AI people, so they will be talking to AI-only localization companies and comparing them to us. And I understand we've been using this new technology. We're using that. We're doing some pilots. We're showing them. We always want to bring innovation to our clients. But they're saying, oh, but you're a translation company. You're not using AI. So we have to actually promote internally that we are using these tools. And in software development, you are going to see some increases. We've seen it, for example, when we write content, right? If we write descriptions for a fashion brand, before there would be we wouldn't be able to write it. We'd have to write it by human. Now with a generative AI, it's similar to a localization process. We'll create the draft, edit it, and send it off. In some cases, because it's informative, it just needs a quick QC. And it's been revolutionary. Whereas if you look at machine translation to generative AI machine translation, you are going to see those increments of 10, 15%. There are some improvements. The natural prompts are really super helpful. But outside of that, it's not a paradigm change, right? Also, if you look at subtitles, you can do some live TV subtitles. Generative is way better than machine, right? And so there are those increases for us. But it's interesting how people expect more, but it's a revolution, and it's not a revolution. We've been progressing on this. On the software development, it is absolutely, and I know developers are there, but it's interesting how the image of localization and the impact it has on us is not revolutionary. It's incremental, and it's always been incremental. So I think that is an interesting thing there, and it's always been in our DNA to train to new technologies and rules-based, statistical-based, NMT, and this is all just the next wave for us. Now, I think that on software, on some other more where you create and generate content, it has been huge. And it does have an impact. If today you have a website localization budget, you're not going to spend it on translation. You're going to spend it on SEO. You're going to spend it on making sure your content is seen. So there is a switch. And again, it's more to the more added value services.
Really important on the skills side of things as well. And it's very alluring, of course, and it all sounds wonderful. But we have to understand what the ethical considerations are. And I think this is something that needs to be considered. And maybe... Jonas, if I can look at your view here in terms of what aspects of language services that AI cannot replace. We heard a little bit about this earlier on in terms of the repetitive tasks and so on. But where does the human touch kind of remain?
Yeah, I thought the answer to that question was kind of obvious, but then we had the keynote this morning, and I was thinking of it like anything that has creativity in it or empathy, and then he had literally those words up on the screen, right? That even those things can be replaced. But I agree to a certain extent. So I think still anything that has to do with creativity and empathy. So I've used ChatGPT and other LLMs myself for creative tasks. So for example, if we built a logistics platform for drone delivery, for example, we would go in to start the ideation around branding and naming that platform in ChatGPT or some other LLM. And you would get some suggestion. For logistics, drone delivery, you might get something like Logify or something, which is not that imaginative, but it's something. So then you might go back, add to the prompt, and ask ChatGPT, can you come up with something more imaginative to Logify? Or can you give me 10 suggestions for this platform? And you might get one that is good, sort of something at least that gives you an idea that you can work with. But I don't think that it can completely replace a language or a linguist expert in creative work, but you can use it to support it. Empathy, I think, is harder. I don't think that you can replace those tasks. If you think of project management or vendor management, for example, you need to be able to connect with people. You need to convince people. You need to motivate them. You might, in recruitment, attract people to your company instead of your competitor and so on. So I think all those tasks will be hard to replace the human touch, but you can use AI to support tasks.
I might just comment on this for a moment. There's an amazing study someone told me about recently where I think it was in the UK, patients were connected with either human doctors or an AI via text-based communication, and then asked two questions. The first one was, could you tell if you were speaking to the human or the machine? And the overwhelming majority could. Second question was, which experience did you prefer? And the overwhelming majority preferred the machine.
Wow.
Which is quite amazing. So it's interesting. I would actually say that I think generative is going to just astronomically increase volumes, and that means complexity, it means risk. So where human beings still have a huge role to play is in applying the business logic that is pertinent to that particular business's interpretation of its priorities, and judging levels of risk that are appropriate, because that is subjective, and we see this all the time. Two companies, ostensibly from the outside, potentially solving similar kinds of problems, want to do it in very different ways with very different processes, very different risk appetites. So I think human beings still need to make a lot of those judgment calls, and play a huge part in pulling together the business logic, the integration to many different systems, the definition of what success looks like. Hyper-personalized, generated websites by Nike will probably look very different to the same thing by Adidas. And they will want it to be different, and it will be down to the humans to drive that difference, because they'll probably be using many of the same LLMs behind the scenes. And then the last thing is, human beings will still be the last line of defense against mistakes and catching those mistakes, because machines might make fewer of them on a percentage basis in the future than they do today, but they will make them at massive volumes in scale and speed. So they'll propagate those mistakes as well, and humans will still be that last line of defense for a sort of rapid risk reduction type thing, which is different from beautiful artisanal creation, but nevertheless incredibly important and probably high volume type activity.
Yeah, I think moderation is something that, is we see a lot of where there's higher volume. Social media is a good example where they have big moderation needs. And it's a good example of where the volumes have gotten. I mean, on YouTube, the number of hours is just incredible. And moderation doesn't catch everything. So I think moderation would always be there. And also, a lot of the content is for humans. So if you're going to look at content, if it's text or if it's video, it's for a human. So you're always going to want to make sure there's a human that sees it before you deliver it, right? You don't want to put something out there for humans that no human has seen. It's just a big risk. So.
We can't move on from this segment without talking about bias. And actually, it was kind of interesting this morning after the session. I met somebody in the bathroom who said there was loads of people in the room that all had their hands up to ask a question, but only 3 men got asked the question. But there was loads of women that didn't get asked. And we were talking about bias. It was kind of interesting. What's your take on bias in AI-generated translations to the panel?
It's a very real risk. Depends on many factors: data sets, the human training that goes into it, the audience that provides the real-life human feedback. And it's very dangerous, particularly when you get into AI-generated data sets against which they train, and it might be sort of a self-reinforcing bias that gets accentuated. I don't know that I don't have a fantastic answer other than awareness. And society has to play a role. You also see companies that sometimes take stances on these things. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but they should be very open about what their stance is if they're going to take one. And you should know when you pick up the newspaper what its politics is, and when you open Fox News what its politics is. So if a company's going to take a stance, then they should. But tricky question. Google got this very wrong recently, didn't they?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think it's a big opportunity for us in this industry, actually, to help fight that bias or contribute to reducing the bias. There will always be some bias. All of us are biased as well, so it's not only AI. But we've seen a lot of work come in reinforcement learning with human feedback. So basically, you're looking at the output of a large language model or AI, and then you're providing a human in the loop to provide that feedback, essentially to align the output of the AI with human preferences. Mm-hmm. And we have translators around the world, and the translators are essentially domain experts in their field. So they will be able to tell if something, is this correct or not? Is this biased in a certain way or not? And can provide not only to language AI, but to all kinds of AI, a good feedback loop and help address that bias problem.
Yeah. Barnaby?
I think it's, again, having a human in the loop, and the interesting thing with localization companies is that we have data which is also human validated, and it is one of the unique selling points that we have, is that the data we provide has been human validated, whereas a lot of the systems are trained on public content. There's also the rights issue there, which is a big issue here, and they're training with content that may not be allowed to use, or content that's not moderated. And so I think that having also people aware that that data is available and that it is validated by humans. So it is very expensive, and there's a cost to it, but then the output, some of these things can be addressed.
Yeah, so an opportunity for us. I like that takeaway. Okay, so let's look to the future a little bit, and I want to leave enough time for questions and answers on the end, but we have to look ahead because we're all stuck in, I think we were stuck in not being able to move, and a bit of immobilization last year, and I think there's a bit of a reality, a bit of settling. But we have to look ahead and see what does it look like. So in terms of roles, because we're talking specifically about roles here today, what kind of roles do you envision? We saw some of the ones that were the fastest growing. There's no real surprises there. As this continues to evolve, how can we prepare as professionals for these future opportunities, which I think there will be many?
Yeah, I think to Georg's point before, a lot of content will be created with AI, right? So we need to have people that are translators and domain experts review that content. So I think that there will be a lot of work in that. I wouldn't worry as a translator today for lack of work in that sense. I think there's another interesting role that we might see. So translators changing from translators to domain experts and then to experts in selecting and evaluating large language models. A lot of companies use multiple LLMs or one LLM that is trained in different ways or with different parameters and different temperatures to the parameters. And they will provide, of course, different output for the very same prompt or the same question. And for the different use cases, you will need to pick the right LLM and the right parameters and so on. So there's a role for those domain experts or experts on AI evaluation and selection to contribute to companies in that. And I think it's going to be a continuous task as the LLMs continue to train or get trained and evolve. And the use cases multiply across multiple languages and so on as well. So I think that's going to be another big role in the future.
Yeah, on that point of the increase in volume, something which is also very interesting, we see now in Dublin, we recently expanded quite a lot in the Africa region, and with automatic dubbing or with a human in the loop, we're now able to provide some services in some languages that before did not have access to any dubbed content. Because they were so small. And so when looking at a market in Africa, most countries have too many languages, too many minority languages to give that return on investment. And so we're looking at now providing some new languages that before did not have content. So there's a whole new market for people to be able to work on that. And I think it's a good illustration of not to fear the increase in volume, not to fear the expansion in localized content. It actually makes people used to seeing localized content, want localized content, and to be able to also go into more localized, more regional and minority languages.
Yeah.
Well, if I was going to add, we're investing heavily in AI research. I think the research side of product development becomes very important because this whole space is moving so fast. And then you need to have AI-infused skills all the way through product development because it's not just understanding the AI, but actually how does he make it usable? How do you make it appear inside user experiences? You know, in many places, it's not a distinct thing. It's actually just another tool that gets kind of surfaced in lots of places. One way I think one can think about it is that anywhere where there's an unlimited amount of work to do, then AI is going to help 10 people to be 10 times as productive. So anything creative like software development, like marketing copy, you can do unlimited experiments. Anywhere where there's finite work to do, like lawyers, like legal, right? There's only so many contracts to be reviewed, and there's only so many contracts to be written. Then those types of work will probably done with fewer people, right? More effectiveness. And so it may be that there'll be like some expansion of more contracts for like more edge use cases, but it's not going to be really dramatic. So my wife's a lawyer, and we've talked about this, and there's some concerns around that in the legal industry. But if you're a software engineer, if you're in marketing, if you're in sales, if you're in so many like limitless style careers, then I think it's a huge kind of force projection or like leverage tool.
Yeah. I mean, do you think it's going to transform? Will it completely transform our industry in terms of?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Like yes. and I think one area where we may if I was going to be mildly provocative, it would be to say, up to this point, humans have been the gold standard. I think that starts to get challenged. Not always, not immediately, but over time it starts to get challenged because humans are fallible. You ask 10 humans to evaluate Shakespeare, you will get different answers. And of course it's subjective. And at some point, we have to, I think, start to build a really interesting tension between kind of machine quality scoring and human quality scoring, and start to actually hold humans accountable for over-editing and overwork. And that's an interesting tension, which is going to challenge, I think, some of the inherent or innate value we place on human review. I mean, you've got to remember in the US elections, like nearly half of the country votes for someone that the other half of the country really hates, right? So human review is not necessarily like a total gold standard. And I think the machines can play a really interesting part in that. And I think that actually will be one of the big shifts in business model and in how companies spend their money in the next year and a half, 2 years.
that you're talking about transformation, but what about the balance between human and machine involvement over the next 5 to 10 years? Maybe Jonas and Barnaby, if you could weigh in on how you see that balance shift.
It's very hard to say in the next 5 to 10 years because things are changing so fast. Just imagine where we were 18 months ago and where we are now. But I also don't think that that this journey that we're on started with AI, right? It started maybe with the spell checkers or the electronic dictionaries, and then CAT tools, MT, NMT, AI, generative AI. So it's hard to say what's next. But it's really all productivity tools, right? It's helping us do our jobs better, be more productive, and so on. So this journey won't end with AI or generative AI. It's just the next leg on that journey, and I'm sure humans will remain in the loop. There will be a lot of work for humans still, so I wouldn't be too worried about it.
We all just sit at home and the machines will do the work for us, like,
Why not?
like in our keynote this morning. That would be great. The utopian future instead of the dystopian one.
No, I think it's the opposite. I think it's going to challenge humans to find new skills and adapt. And
Yeah.
humans are good at adapting. And I think people's goal is to not to sit on a sofa and let a machine do everything. People's goal is to improve and learn. So it's here to challenge us and up to us to take on the challenge.
I think, you said, how did you phrase the question? It was like how much?
The balance.
The balance?
Yes, the balance
So I
between
think,
human and machine involvement.
yeah, if you think about that, if you measure that in terms of quantity of words, a company today that processes 1 billion words thinks it's doing a lot, and I think in 5 years' time it'll be processing 100 billion words or 1 trillion words, right? So that would be my first starting point. And then of that 100 billion words that company does, what percentage of them are going to be human reviewed? It'll be a lower percentage than today. Mm-hmm. So I would say in percentage terms, the balance is going to shift dramatically. In real terms, the human work level will probably rise. But it might shift in its character. So that, I think it depends a bit how you measure it. In real terms, continue to grow. I'm sure of that.